Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me. Melt me.
I think it would have been something special to be a fly on the wall and to hear the conversation that took place between Philip and Andrew as they discussed the request from the Greeks. Sir, we wish to see Jesus. I think every single pulpit should actually be inscribed somewhere on it, Sir, we wish to see Jesus. Surely they were having some form of lively discussion about these outsiders who were bold enough to approach Jesus and speak with him. It seems that Philip and Andrew went together to hear Jesus' reaction, wondering what their Jewish teacher, what their master would say about these Gentiles who lacked the cultural benefit of a heritage under Mosaic law. And that's why I decided that there was a spur of the moment, I wasn't going to do it, but that's why I decided now in the service that I would read the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments. John doesn't really give us much in the way of details about these Gentiles and about what they were doing at the Passover festival in Jerusalem, except that they came with others who were there to worship. So one would naturally assume they were there to worship. All we know is that it was a mixed-up society, pretty much like ours today, pretty much like this community right here in front of me, a bit of a mixed-up community. And I think that in Jerusalem, and as it is over Passover even now, there were all sorts of religious and cultural persuasions passing through, some staying, some vying for dominance, others wanting simply enough space just to survive. John doesn't tell us what the Greeks' questions were, but I think we can safely surmise from Jesus' response to them that it might have had something to do with their place in the message of salvation, the gospel. Was Jesus' message only for the Jews? And if that were the case, which Jews? Was Jesus' message for the Gentiles as well? Again, if so, which Gentiles? Dear friends, we're approximately halfway through the liturgical season of Lent, and those of us who observe Lent vaguely diligently, and I include myself in the vaguely diligently part, have been wrestling with rules in a kind of empty space, a cavernous space, a wilderness, if you like. If we have to follow rules, and this is why it's important for me today as I engage, this was my thinking, if we have to follow rules, whose rules do we follow? Our own? The church's? God's? So much controversy in the church over the last 30 years or so has been around these issues. And when the debate gets really, really hot and tense, all sides of whatever debate you're having start quoting from the Bible, chapter and verse to support their own set of rules, their own version of what it means to be Christian. In my profession, this is called proof texting. Like those ancient Greeks wanting to see Jesus, we want to know who's really saved, who's got all the answers, who is living the right life. And if we're not all too unusual in our own beings, we have probably spent our various Lenten journeys and pilgrimages trying to figure out the answer to that very question. We do this in order to discern whose understanding of the gospel is correct, just so we can get our acts together, our lives sorted out in time for Easter. The ancient church, what is ancient? I suppose that's relative as well. The ancient church, the people that would have been living around Cyril of Jerusalem's time, would spend the entire Lent preparing for baptism and get baptized on Easter morning. Kind of a custom that we try and hold on to. We don't do it very well, but we try. I think perhaps we receive some comforting words from the prophet Jeremiah, chapter 31, where the prophet writes about a new covenant. At least we know that our struggles and our controversies with law and the juxtaposition with grace are nothing new. Jeremiah spoke at a time when the Babylonian Empire had decimated ancient Israel. And the people of ancient Israel were plucked up from their homeland and scattered to foreign countries round about the 7th century before Jesus came onto the scene in terms of our worldly experience. These people were surrounded by strange religions, and without their central place of worship, the temple in Jerusalem, the people in exile were asking very, very difficult questions about the source of their identity. Like us, they wanted to know what rules they should follow, the standard of behavior that would keep them in contact with their God and hold them together as a people. Jeremiah's response in chapter 31 is frustrating as it is hopeful. In chapter 31, verse 33 of Jeremiah, the prophet writes about this new covenant being written on the hearts of God's people, one that will bring such intimate knowledge of God, in fact, that all the old rules will no longer be necessary, they will no longer be applicable. I think it's a beautiful image, but one that is far from easy, because a lot of people use that to perpetuate anarchy. Rules are quite important. If we didn't have rules, we'd be wild and completely off the wall. The thing is, Christianity has struggled for about 2,000 years trying to reconcile itself to this new covenant. If church history says anything at all, it tells us how much trouble we've had believing that God's law is actually in our hearts. We're so much more inclined to write canon law and set up regulations for everything from our liturgies to our altar guilds, and to every dimension of church life, rather than to take what Jeremiah the prophet says seriously. I was sharing with Duncan when I arrived that actually this is a challenge for me, because I like the fine print in my prayer book. It tells me what to do. And yet I have to forego in order to share the gospel, to break the word with people of different Christian persuasions. The thing is, I think it's a terrible way to approach our final preparations for the Feast of the Resurrection, Easter. Just when we're supposed to have all our ducks in a row and ourselves prepared for Easter, we are confronted with some sense that our effort to follow rules is back to front. What we learn today in this service, what I learn in this service, and what we learn today from the reading from John's Gospel and also from the prophet Jeremiah, is that we miss the point in our theological and ecclesiastical differences, our bitter disputes over what constitutes right behavior, our tireless pursuit of perfecting ourselves when every correction seems to raise a multitude of new problems. The good news today is that Jesus Christ understands exactly where we are, both individually and as the corporate church. John's Gospel has Jesus saying, "Now my soul is troubled. And what should I say? Father, save me from this hour." No, it is for this reason that I come to this hour. If we are troubled by the present state of things, perhaps in the church, I guess that you're well read in terms of the news of the state of things in the world, we are exactly where we need to be. If we are confused and disturbed by our lack of certainty about things, particularly spiritual, then that is precisely where we ought to be, how we ought to feel. It is because of our very confusion that we are actually more inclined to stop and listen for the voice of God, the thunder that the bystanders hear in the gospel, the thunder that comes rolling into the midst of our unsettled hearts and announces that God is with us, God Emmanuel. And then we're called simply to serve and to follow. This is the only instruction that Jesus seems to give regarding those Greeks who wanted to see Jesus. That's all that Jesus asks each one of us. That's all that Christ demands of the church, universal. But we all know what that means, don't we? As I get on with it. Following means giving up the security of our rules. It involves walking the path to the cross, a place where our confusion and Christ's confusion come together in a terrible moment of pain, of suffering. A place where our rules don't work anymore, and all our systems, whether it be civil society or liturgical systems, break down. It's a grim message, isn't it? But it's a message that seems worthy of these last few weeks as we approach Easter. So, what do we have before us? We must follow. We must listen to the confusing thunder of God's voice in our lives and bear our agitated hearts in the way of the cross. It does not promise to be a fun time for any of us, because we all know what it means to experience challenges, to experience difficulties, to suffer. However, Christ's message, Christ's promise, never leaves us without hope. For although the deadly judgment is coming, we heard about that in that gospel passage, we are told that Christ will rise again and draw us together into the heart of God. It is this hope in Easter that will be our strength as we approach Holy Week. It promises, in fulfillment of Jeremiah's promise, to write God's law of love within our very beings, in the very depths of our hearts. And above all, it promises to show us finally that it is God's effort and strength that will give us new and abundant life. If only we are willing to follow. Amen.